The containment cell was quiet, save for the low, constant hum of the energy barrier that shimmered in pale blue across the open threshold. It cast shifting light against the metal walls, painting the room in sterile sorrow. Ariven sat on the cold bench, unmoving, her back straight out of habit, not will. Her violet skin bore the faded bruises of capture, though the worst wounds were invisible, buried in her silence. Her hair, once tied in battle braids, now fell in dark tangles around her face, like shadows trying to hide her from herself. She hadn't spoken in 34 days, not to the guards, not to the medics, not to the man who brought her tasteless food twice a day. She had refused every question, every plea, every subtle threat. The silence was her only control left, but her mind was loud. It dragged her back again and again to that night. The air had been sharp with the scent of ozone and fire. Outpost Meridian's lights had died one by one as her unit advanced through the storm, blades drawn, visors down. Her orders had been clear: neutralize the weapons facility. Secure all data. No survivors. She remembered the first human she saw young, barely out of training, eyes wide with fear as she brought him down. Efficiency, precision, no names, no hesitation. The others had followed, and by the time dawn touched the wreckage, the outpost was ash. She had done her duty. She had believed in the mission, until she saw the medic wing, until she saw the children, until too late. Now silence was her penance. The corridor lights shifted as footsteps echoed closer, not rushed, not hesitant. Steady, military. The energy barrier hissed as it deactivated. Prisoner 774, a voice said. You have a visitor. She didn't look up. Another interrogator. Another waste of time. Then she heard it boots stepping in, stopping 2 meters from her. Male voice, steady and measured. My name is Commander Holt. I've been assigned to your case. Her breath caught. She looked up finally. He stood tall, arms folded behind his back, the commander's insignia shining dull silver on his collar, dark hair combed back. Strong jaw, but it was his eyes that stopped her. Gray-blue, like storm clouds over cracked earth. Eyes that had seen too much. Ariven felt it: recognition. A name from the field reports. Holt, the sole survivor of Meridian. The commander she had failed to kill. He looked at her, not like a soldier observing an enemy, but like a man staring into the mouth of a ghost. You're not what I expected, he said softly. No chains, no screaming. He set a small file on the bench beside the wall. You haven't said a word since capture, not even your name. She stared at him, unblinking. He exhaled through his nose, slow, controlled. Your silence won't kill my ghosts, he said, turning to leave. Only the truth might. His hand brushed the door sensor. She whispered then, her voice rough from disuse. One word, sharp as a blade drawn in the dark. Callan. Holt froze. His back stiffened. He turned slowly. His eyes were wide now, something breaking behind them. That name, he said, barely audible. You remember him? She nodded. Once, her voice trembled. The medic. He begged me to save the girl before he bled out. Holt's jaw clenched, his throat working hard as he tried to steady himself. That girl, he said, voice cracked, was my niece. Neither of them spoke after that. The silence had changed. It wasn't a shield anymore. It was a wound. The interrogation chamber was colder than the cell. Not by temperature, but by design. No shadows to hide in. No sound but the buzz of overhead lights and the faint whir of cameras embedded in the walls. Ariven sat motionless in the metal chair, wrists resting on the table, her posture straight but no longer defiant. Across from her, Commander Holt entered without ceremony, no guards, no theatrics. Just a datapad tucked under his arm and a coffee cup clutched in his hand like it was the only warmth in the room. He set the datapad down, but didn't speak. Neither did she. They stared at each other in silence that felt like a second war one. Neither of them wanted to win. You said his name, Holt finally murmured. Callan. Ariven gave a small nod. Her voice came after a pause, like it had to fight through walls inside her just to reach the air. He tried to stop the bleeding with his own belt, she said, and told me to carry the child out. I didn't, I thought. If I hesitated, I'd be executed too. Holt didn't flinch, but she saw the hurt register in his eyes. It was there, buried under the practiced stoicism of a soldier. She survived, he said. Barely. 3 weeks in medbay. She still doesn't speak. Silence swelled again, heavier than before. Ariven looked down at her hands, scarred knuckles. Curling slightly. I thought I was saving lives that night. I thought we were stopping a genocide. You weren't, Holt said softly, not cruelly. Just tired. We were growing food. Cross-species hybrids that could take root in Sirakai soil. Our teams hoped if your people saw crops growing, they'd see peace was possible. She closed her eyes. They told us it was a viral weapon lab. They lied to both of us. His words landed like quiet bombs. Ariven looked up sharply. Holt's gaze held hers no longer angry, just resolute. I pulled the mission intel logs. Something didn't add up. Your side wasn't the only one fed poison. We were told Meridian had fortified weapon caches. Why station only 20 guards? And researchers if that was true? Her brow furrowed. Why would your own command lie to you? He didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he slid a document across the table. It flickered to life, showing a classified report, fragmented logs, dates, blacked out signatures. I think someone wanted a war. And they made sure both sides saw only the pieces they needed to pull the trigger. Her eyes scanned the report, jaw tightening. She recognized fragments of her own briefing transcripts, except this version included notations, mismatched source tags, and altered origin codes. They spliced our intelligence together with your threat matrix. And leaked it, Holt added grimly, to both sides. Just enough to spark fear. Just enough to justify a strike. But who? She whispered. Holt leaned forward, voice low. That's what I'm trying to find out. Ariven sat back, the weight of it sinking in. She hadn't just killed under false orders. She'd been used. What happens if you prove this? She asked. Holt shrugged. If I'm right, someone in high command on both sides profits from fear. Maybe weapons contracts. Maybe political leverage. Doesn't matter. They'll bury it. They'll bury me. Ariven looked at him hard. Then why risk it? Because you remembered, Callan, he said quietly. Because maybe you're not the only one who deserves a second chance. She didn't speak again for a long time. But something had shifted. She wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She was a witness, and witnesses were dangerous. Later that night, in the dim privacy of her cell, Ariven pulled a piece of chalk from the corner of her bunk, a broken fragment left by another inmate long gone. She drew a circle on the wall, a crude map, a place burned into her memory, the staging base from her last mission, coordinates, commanders, flight schedules. She labeled it in Sirakai runes. Then she added one word, in human script, scrawled with trembling fingers, truth. The storm came without warning. Not outside. There were no windows in the underground compound, but in the way the walls seemed to pulse with sudden activity, alarms buzzing just beneath the surface of perception. The guards moved faster in the halls. The cameras blinked more frequently. And when Holt entered Ariven's cell that morning, he didn't bring a datapad or coffee. He brought silence. And a bruise blooming on his cheekbone. What happened? She asked, rising from the bench, Forgetting for a moment that she had ever sworn not to care, Holt shook his head. They know I accessed the archives. Internal Affairs pulled me for questioning last night. She approached slowly, cautiously. Did they ask about me? They asked why a commander with a decorated record is spending so much time talking to a war criminal instead of prepping for the tribunal. I told them you might be holding on to information that could unravel everything. His tone was dry, bitter. They didn't like that answer. Ariven's pulse quickened. Then stop. Let them execute me. I'm not worth this. His eyes locked with hers storm gray, alive with something electric. You're wrong. She didn't know what to say to that, so she sat. And he followed. The light in the room flickered. They moved up your tribunal date, he said, voice low. 2 days from now. Someone's trying to cut this short. Someone high enough to make judges nervous. And the report? She asked. Discredited. Vanished from the system. My clearance was revoked 5 hours ago. She exhaled slowly, fists clenching. Then it's over. No, not yet. Holt's eyes narrowed. We still have one angle. You told me your final deployment was staged. Out of Facility Ceta 9. You remember the name of your commander? Field Marshal Tail Voss, she said instantly. He handpicked us, swore we'd be heroes. Voss now runs your diplomatic corps, Holt said. He's going to be on station for a cross-species summit tomorrow. Ariven stared at him, piecing it together. You want me to confront him? On record. In front of Sirakai and human officials. If he lied to you, if he manipulated the intelligence, then he's the thread that unravels the entire war narrative. But it has to be your voice, not mine. She hesitated, thinking of the girl in the medbay, the one she'd left to die, the one who still didn't speak. Could she look her in the eye if she didn't try? I'll do it, she said. But you'll be watched. I already am, he said, his voice suddenly softer. They've been monitoring our sessions. Ariven's mouth went dry. All of them? Holt nodded. They haven't said it, but I can see it in the way they look at me now, like they're waiting for me to fail. Or break. She stepped closer, closer than protocol allowed. Her voice dropped. Then let's give them something to be afraid of. The next day, the summit hall was filled with quiet tension. Ambassadors flanked by guards, diplomats seated behind layers of security glass, every motion recorded, analyzed. Ariven entered in cuffs, escorted by Holt and 2 MPS. Her head held high despite the whispers. Voss sat at the head of the Sirakai delegation. Older now, more polished, but his eyes were still sharp like polished obsidian. He didn't blink when he saw her. Didn't move until she spoke. You told us we were targeting a bioweapon lab. That humans had created spores to wipe out our colonies. You lied. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Voss's voice was ice. You dishonor your own fallen by siding with their murderers. Ariven stepped forward. I watched a human medic give his last breath to save a child. I was told they were monsters. But the only monster in that outpost ... was me. Voss's smile faltered. You think a single emotional outburst will undo years of military necessity? Holt stepped beside her. We have recovered audio logs. Field orders signed by your hand contradicting the mission intelligence. Voss stood now. This is a betrayal of your people. No, Ariven said firmly. This is the beginning of truth. Security swarmed as the room erupted. Sirakai. Officials scrambled. Human brass began pulling files. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. But Ariven stood still, eyes locked on Holt, as the world she once knew began to crack open. That night, she was placed back in her cell, but not alone. Holt stayed, seated beside her, bruised, exhausted, but unshaken. You started a war and... There, he said, voice barely above a whisper. No, she replied, her head resting against the wall. I think I might have just ended one. His hand brushed hers deliberately this time. No protocol. No fear. The surveillance cameras blinked overhead. Neither of them cared. The walls felt thinner, not physically. Ariven knew every inch of her cell by now, knew its width, its false air vents, its flawless surveillance nodes, but something about the air had changed since the summit. The silence no longer echoed. It pulsed as if listening. News had spread. Not officially, no broadcasts, no announcements, but in the way guards moved slower when near her, the way other prisoners stole glances when they passed her cell. She'd become a symbol now. Of what? She wasn't sure. Traitor, truth-teller. Both. 3 days had passed since she'd stood before her former commander and named his lies aloud. Since she'd called out the war machine and dared it to answer back. Vos hadn't been arrested. Of course not. But murmurs had begun in both species delegations. That was enough. For now Holt arrived without warning again. No files, no coffee. Just tension in every line of his body. They've grounded me, he said before the door fully hissed shut. Stripped me of my clearance. Sighed, I'm compromised. She stood up fast. What does that mean? It means I'm not supposed to see you anymore. He looked at her, then really looked, and something in his voice cracked. It means I may not have another chance. Without thinking, she crossed the space between them. Their hands touched. Then let's not waste it, she said. He took a breath. Before they pulled me, I did one last dive into the black archive. I found something. He handed her a chip. Unassuming, small, but the weight of it pressed like a weapon in her palm. What is it? Your brother. She froze. Holt continued gently. Vos never reported his squad losses correctly. He listed your brother as missing, but there's a video record. He was taken during a loyalty filtration sweep, not killed. Transported to an indoctrination site off-grid. Alive. She shook her head. No, I buried him. You buried what Vos let you see. Ariven, your brother might still be alive. She sat down slowly, knees buckling under the shock. Her breath came in shallow waves. I can't go to him, she whispered. You won't have to, Holt said. We'll bring him to you. But there's more. Of course there was. He placed a second chip beside her. This contains command. Orders from both sides, human and Sirakai. Coordinated false flags, staged intel leaks. War profits. It's enough to prove Meridian wasn't an accident. It was engineered. Who else knows? Just us. And maybe whoever's watching the watchers. She stared at him. If this gets out, they'll kill you. They'll kill me. They'll burn the memory of your testimony from every data system in the quadrant. Which is why we need to make the choice now. What choice? Holt took her hands in his. To run. Her eyes widened. You want to defect? No, he said. I want to expose them, but I won't do it without you. Her mind raced. This wasn't rebellion. This was suicide. But then she thought of her brother's smile. Of Callan's final plea. Of the child left to die. Of the child who lived. Ariven looked up into Holt's storm-gray eyes and made the only decision that mattered. When? Tonight. That word dropped between them like a countdown. He stood. I'll come for you before second watch. Be ready. Then, in an instant, he was gone. The lights dimmed. The door sealed. And the surveillance camera in the corner sparked once, flickered and died. Ariven stood in the quiet. Then she opened. The floor panel she'd memorized weeks ago. Inside, chalked in crude Sirakai script, were words she'd never dared say aloud. Hope returns. And beside them, she wrote two more. Not alone. The station's artificial dusk settled like fog over steel corridors and flickering overhead panels. By now, The routine of nightfall in the human sector had dulled most senses. Guards rotated, patrols thinned, and cameras entered passive scan mode, trusting the security algorithms to alert for deviation. It was in this lull, this orchestrated calm, that Ryland Holt moved. He wore an engineer's jumpsuit instead of his uniform gray, anonymous, stained in grease and time. A maintenance ID tag blinked on his chest, faked just well enough to pass low-level scans. Inside the inner pocket of his vest was the chip, the one that could destroy two governments if it ever saw the light of an honest tribunal. In his other pocket was a compressed pulse grenade stolen from the requisitions locker under the guise of training exercises. If they caught him before he reached her, it wouldn't be interrogation. It would be silence, permanent and untraceable. He reached subdeck 6. The lights above cell block 9 flickered as if sensing something was wrong. She was waiting. Ariven stood when the door hissed open. Her cuffs were already undone. The magnetic locks had short-circuited hours ago from a small circuit fry she'd engineered with a piece of wiring from her cot and a food tray's thermal cell. She wore the same tattered inmate uniform, but her eyes were no longer sunken with shame. They burned now, with purpose. With fire? Ready? He asked. Her answer was a quiet nod, followed by a question he hadn't expected. If we don't make it out, do you regret it? He looked at her for a moment. Regret meeting you? No. Regret that I didn't walk away the first day. Every day since. And I'd still choose it all again. She stepped close enough to rest her forehead against his. Then let's burn. The lies down together. They moved through the maintenance shaft Holt had mapped from old schematics, narrow, dark, and lined with dust. Every step was time measured in risk. He'd synchronized their route with a 36-second gap between drone flyovers. No room for error. At the northern loading hatch, Ariven paused. What is it? Holt asked, breath short. She pressed a hand to the wall, then peeled back a small metal plate to reveal a micro-insignia Sirakai military coating, etched in acid-burned steel. This was a Sirakai infiltration route, she whispered. Voss built this station on top of a covert transit node. Meaning? Meaning we're not the only ones running through these walls. As if summoned by fate, a faint clang echoed above them. Then another, deliberate, pacing. They weren't alone. Holt pulled Ariven behind a console as footsteps approached, metallic, heavy, too precise to be human. 2 armored figures emerged from the far access corridor. Sirakai special operatives. Not guards, not diplomats. Kill teams. Her people. Ariven looked at Holt. They're here for the chip, not to rescue me. To erase me. The operatives stopped at the junction. One scanned the path ahead. The other turned toward the maintenance crawl space. They were seconds from discovery. Holt handed her the pulse grenade. I'll draw them. You run. Get the chip to the port. Broadcast everything. No, she whispered harshly. We go together. There. Won't be a together if they catch us both. She stared at him, anger and desperation warring in her chest, then grabbed his collar and kissed him hard. Not in romance, but in defiance. In shared grief. In finality. I'll kill them, she said, voice low, deadly. I know how they think. I was trained with them. He hesitated. Ariven, I'm not your prisoner anymore. I'm your damn partner. Now move. They split. Holt vaulted over the side rail and slammed his hand on a fire override. Red. Lights flared. Alarms screamed. The station systems, trained to overcorrect, began lockdown procedures, temporarily paralyzing internal comms and shutting blast doors at random. The operatives turned, but it was too late. Ariven was already on them. She dropped from the ceiling vent like a blade, slamming into the first with a brutal elbow strike. The second raised a pulse weapon, but Holt's stolen sidearm barked once non-lethal. but enough to shatter the exosuit's shoulder. They were down. Not dead, but out. The pair ran through corridor after corridor, ducking past closing gates, leaping over barricades. Holt led her to the diplomatic shuttle bay where emergency transport pods were docked out. By the time they reached Bay 12, her side was bruised, his left arm was bleeding, and the station's lockdown was starting to stabilize. She uploaded the chip to the diplomatic beacon mounted on the pod. A secure burst signal, it would send the files to 12 independent networks across neutral space. "Are you sure?" she asked as the upload began. "This makes us fugitives, traitors." "No," Holt said. "This makes us the truth." The beacon lit up green. Transmission successful. Suddenly, the hangar door opened and there, silhouetted in floodlight, stood Field Marshal Voss. Not with soldiers, but alone. "You could have lived quietly," Voss said, voice calm. "But you chose to become a symbol." Ariven raised her hands, not in surrender, but in challenge. "No, I chose to stop being your weapon." Voss pulled a disruptor, but Holt was faster. The shot hit Voss square in the chest, not fatal, but enough to drop him. They didn't wait to see if he'd rise again. The shuttle door sealed. As it launched, silence fell over the stars. Two fugitives, one truth. No way back. The shuttle cut through space like a blade in the dark, silent but not invisible. Alarms echoed far behind them, now railing through encrypted comms and redirected sensor sweeps, but they both knew the real pursuit hadn't even begun. Rilland. Holt sat in the co-pilot's seat, one hand pressed against the wound in his side, breath shallow but steady. Ariven sat beside him, her purple skin illuminated by the pale glow of the nav console, eyes fixed on the stars ahead. The truth had been sent. That part was done. Now came the part where the truth fought to survive. "How long until we hit the relay?" she asked, her voice calm but tight. 6 minutes if we keep dodging their lock-ons, Holt replied, adjusting the manual thrusters. "This thing wasn't built for speed. It was built for diplomacy, or escape, I guess," Ariven frowned. "We're not going to outrun them." "No," he said, "but we don't have to." He flipped a toggle, rerouting auxiliary power to the fusion drive. The ship stuttered, then surged forward with a low groan. "We just need to get to the fringe." She turned toward him. "The fringe is unaligned space. It's crawling with smugglers, rogue fleets, and no one follows jurisdiction. If we make it there, we buy time." He gritted his teeth, blood still seeping through his shirt. She reached over and peeled the fabric away gently. "Pulse fragment. You need a dermazal and nanograft," she said. "I need you to keep this ship flying." He replied with a weak grin. She took over the controls, fingers dancing across the interface. Holt leaned back, pain dulling his senses, but his mind still sharp. "Do you think they'll kill Voss?" Ariven asked suddenly. "No," Holt said. "He's too valuable. They'll turn him into a scapegoat. Claim he acted alone, call it an isolated corruption case. They'll say justice was served. But the war, they won't end it. Not easily. Not yet. But we cracked the door." That transmission hit neutral intelligence boards, refugee networks, resistance enclaves. "People are going to start asking questions." She glanced at him. "And us?" He smiled faintly. "They'll brand us traitors. Enemies of the Alliance. Criminal lovers, probably." She laughed just once, but it was real. The first laugh in weeks. Then the nav system blared. "Proximity alert," she said, hands flying to controls. "Incoming vessel human signature, military class." "No. Way they got here this fast," Holt muttered. Unless a new voice crackled over the comm, cold and calculated. "Diplomatic vessel 1290. This is Interceptor Redshade under high command authority. Power down and prepare for boarding. Ariven looked to Holt. They're jamming the emergency nav. We can't outgun them, he said. She pulled up schematics. Then we outfly them. What followed was chaos. Ariven flew like someone who'd been born inside fire. The shuttle dove into asteroid fields and rode plasma flares off mining exhaust. Behind them, Redshade launched drone silent silver predators with precision scanners. One struck their rear stabilizer. Sparks rained from the console. We're losing control, Holt growled. No, she snapped. We're not. Ariven rerouted life support through the stabilizers, choking oxygen just long enough to regain balance. Holt gasped, lungs burning, but didn't argue. We've got one shot, she said. There's a gravitational eddy near the fringe border. If we slingshot, we'll fry half the systems, he finished. She looked at him. Worth it? His answer was simple. With you? Always. The shuttle dove into the maelstrom. Everything shook. Alarms screamed. Systems failed one by one. But the stars shifted and suddenly, the border fractured around them. The fringe. They made it, but their ship didn't. The shuttle gave one last groan before sputtering, dead in low orbit above an ice-shattered moon. Holt coughed, blood flecking his lips. Emergency beacon? Ariven asked. Manual launch pod, he said, crawling to the side panel. She helped him in. The pod sealed behind them, pressurized, and launched. Hours passed. Or days. Time blurred. Then came the pickup. A ship not human, not Sirakai latched onto their pod. When the doors hissed open, they were staring at a face neither of them recognized. A woman, cloaked in gray, eyes like burning coal. You're the ones who burned the veil, she said. Come, there's a war waiting for truth. They followed. Her. Because this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. The skies above the neutral zone station known only as Mirabelle's refuge were a swirl of fractured color gas trails from ion drives mixing with the aurora of a cracked atmosphere. It was the kind of place forgotten by maps but remembered in whispers. It was also the last place two fugitives could hide from the eyes of an empire. Inside the station's core chamber, beneath layers of reinforced alloy and shielded silence, Ariven stood before a jury that had no robes, no insignias, and no loyalty to any flag. They were not military, not politicians. They were something older. Witnesses. Former spies, war survivors, defectors, journalists who had disappeared from the public eye when they got too close to the truth. They called themselves the Echo Court. They called her the weapon who chose not to stay silent. She called herself Ariven Sorrel. Rillen Holt sat behind her, his shoulder bandaged, ribs still healing, but his presence unshaken. The others had tried to keep him from testifying. He was too high profile, too connected. But he insisted. I won't be silent while the world decides who she is without hearing who she became. He'd stood beside her even now, even as the chips fell and a war council convened in secrecy to erase them both. The lead witness, a gray-haired woman with metallic threads woven into her skin, leaned forward. We received your transmission, she said to Ariven. It sparked riots on Mars colonies, uprisings in Sirakai protectorates. Your words are now weapons. Do you understand that? Yes, Ariven replied calmly. Because truth, when denied for too long, always returns sharper than any blade. Another. Judge leaned in. What do you want, warrior? Ariven looked back at Holt for a heartbeat. Then she stepped forward. I want a seat at the next peace summit. Gasps rippled through the chamber. You're a fugitive. Someone hissed. I'm a former soldier who exposed a fabricated war, she answered. I know the lies. I live them. I killed for them. Let me help dismantle the machine that built them. The Echo Court went silent. Then the lead witness spoke. We'll decide. They were escorted out. The hours that followed stretched like years. In the waiting chamber, Holt leaned back, staring at the flickering light overhead. If they deny it, if they send us away, what then? Then we keep telling the story, Ariven said softly, to whoever will listen. And if no one does? She took his hand. We build something of our own. The door opened. The gray-haired witness stepped forward. You're both being offered full political asylum, effective immediately. You'll be given new identities, or the option to attend the summit. But know this, if you speak again, the powers you exposed will come for you. With fleets. Ariven met her gaze. Let them. Holt added, we'll be ready. Months passed. The summit was held on the edge of a shattered moon, with the void itself watching. Ariven stood beside ambassadors who once called her an animal. Holt addressed generals who once buried his reports. They didn't beg for forgiveness. They demanded truth. And it came. The chips they'd recovered were authenticated. War profiteers were named. Voss, disavowed and hunted, tried to unleash one last false flag, but this time the public didn't fall for it. The war didn't end overnight, but it began to end. Years later, under the twin suns of a terraformed world once abandoned to war, a new monument stood. It bore no flags, no names, just a single inscription. Truth begins where silence ends. At its base, Ariven stood with Holt, their fingers intertwined. She wore robes now not of command, but of peace. He wore no uniform, just the scars of survival. I never imagined this, she said. I did, he replied. The moment you said Callan's name. She looked up at him. I love you. He smiled, eyes soft. My enemy, my salvation, my future. As they watched the new world bloom, ships from Sirakai and Earth landed side by side on the soil once soaked in blood. And from that soil, something new finally grew. Hope.